And I just burped while I was saying that. I don't even have water. Okay. Howdy and welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. Today is going to be my September reading wrap up, and also I'm going to dive into a little bit of a book haul that I had towards the end of the month. And I'm super excited to get into it. So let's just go. So I started off the month by reading Cibola Burn, which is the fourth book in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. It was really good, as all of them have been so far, and so I'm very excited about that. I will say Cibola Burn is the first book in the Expanse series that's really based around a singular planet. And that was really interesting because the previous iterations in the series have been more based on like a ship or a space station or an asteroid belt, and they've kind of bounced around to different locations, but pretty much the entire plot of Cibola Burn was on like one planet. There was this whole debate about these people, these kind of refugees, these citizens put down roots and made a little colony. And then this corporation with a bunch of scientists came in and were like freaking out because these colonists were contaminating the planet that they hadn't yet got a chance to study its ecosystem or its geology or anything like that. And so it really delved deep into the whole kind of corporations versus citizens and who has rights on a new colony. And so I live for that kind of stuff in sci-fi, and I thought this did it really, really well and kind of showed the intricacies and the mayhem and political maneuverings. And then of course there's like some other sci-fi shit thrown in. So this was an excellent number 4 for The Expanse, and I'm excited to continue with that series. The next book that I read in the month of September was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I read the entire trilogy in the month of September. This was so good. I instantly just loved this series. The fifth season is a kind of future Earth dystopian type of world where earthbenders exist. If you've ever seen like Avatar: The Last Airbender, you can imagine what an earthbender is. Except in these books, they're called ragas, which is actually the derogatory term for what they are. They're extremely hated and feared by the masses, or kind of the muggles of this world. There's 3 different point of view characters. There is a middle-aged woman, I guess I would call, named Essen, whose toddler has just been murdered. There is a young, maybe like early 20s aged woman named Cyanite, who is living at some sort of academy for ragas and has just been given her first kind of adult assignment, and it's very unpleasant. And then the third point of view character is a young girl named Demaya, whose parents have just found out that she is a raga. And ragas can be born to kind of muggle parents, and it's always really messy and sometimes can be deadly for the children in those situations because they are so hated and feared by the general populace. So that's kind of the setup for the 5th season. It was so good, and the world building was just so deep and rich. I really fell in love with the setting of this book like right away. That follows up with the Obelisk, which is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. And again, I won't get too much into the plot of this one for spoilers, but I do want to mention that in this series, there is a new fantastical species that is introduced, and they're called the Stone Eaters. And the Stone Eaters are kind of like what I imagine like weeping angels in Doctor Who, but a lot less creepy, but still pretty creepy. They're basically just like beings made of stone, and when they move, it's very unsettling to look at. They can basically like move underground, like through the earth very, very quickly. But when they move out in the world as like people-esque statues, they're very slow and it's hard for them to move around like that. I'm explaining it very poorly, but they're a super fascinating race. And I absolutely loved reading just kind of the unsettling nature of the stone eaters and how uncomfortable they made everyone feel who interacted with them. And then the third and final book in the 5th season was The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. The Stone Sky, I thought, was a great wrap up to the series. I felt like in this one, more than the other two, we really got into the deeper themes of what this trilogy was trying to achieve overall. And even though they were present in every other book, they really came to the forefront, I felt like, in the final installation of the trilogy. What it means to be human, what oppression means for the oppressors and for the oppressed, what motherhood really means, and motherhood in a time of crisis especially, and how important or challenging those bonds can be. And then climate change as well, because their world is so at risk from all of these crazy seismic events that are, it turns out, the fault of many of the previous Ragas and other beings on the planet. So overall, I loved what the series did. I loved what it was trying to say. I thought it said it all really well. And aside from just the magnificent world building that just totally wrapped me up in it, I loved the characters as well. Extra excited that N.K. Jemisin is a Black woman author, which I feel like is something I don't get enough of in my fantasy. So I was super excited for that as well, because I felt like she, of course, told the story through a very meaningful lens. So that was the Broken Earth trilogy. So next up, I was cat sitting for my neighbor, and I was, of course, snooping through his bookshelf, and I saw this tiny little book called Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk by David Sedaris. I just thought the cover looked super cute. I've actually never read anything by David Sedaris, even though I know he's an extremely popular author and cultural commentator. But so I texted my neighbor while I was in his apartment cat sitting, and I said, "Hey, is it okay if I borrow this book?" And he was like, "I have 3 copies of that book. You can just have it." So this is my copy of the book now. But yeah, it's super adorable. It's short stories about little animals, and each one has adorable little pictures of the animals. And it does a really good job of examining human behaviors by juxtaposing them with animals. And it just really brings out the absurdity of what humanity is and how we play against each other and things like that. Kind of the way that I think Nathan Pyle does with Strange Planet comics, if you follow those comics on the internet, and how it just makes human behavior seem really absurd because suddenly an alien's doing it instead of humans, and it makes it seem so it's the same sort of thing, but with animals. And they're just cute and heartfelt little short stories. Some of them are really kind of sad or depressing, and really, it's not just a joyful book. It is a book that takes a hard look at some of humanity's worst behaviors as well. So I really enjoyed this, but at the end of the day, I read it so quickly. I read this whole book in maybe 2.5 hours. So as much as I enjoyed it, it was kind of forgettable because they all kind of blended together. And I don't think I'll remember having read this at the end of the year. I would happily give this to anyone and have them read it, though. I think anyone could enjoy this book. The 6th book that I read this September was The 22 Murders of Madison May, which I actually picked up because Reagan from the Peruse Project recommended it in one of her recent videos. And then I happened to be at Half Price Books, and I saw it on the shelf, and it has a bright yellow cover, so it stands out really well. That was a science fiction thriller, and I would emphasize the thriller more than the science fiction. It was mostly a thriller story, and the science fiction was kind of a plot device of the thriller, more so than it being a sci-fi story with some thriller elements. It was the other way around, which was very fun. I love thrillers. The premise of this, which is stated on the dust jacket, is basically that there is a serial killer who is hopping between parallel universes and keeps murdering the same woman, Madison May. And so this is about a reporter that gets wrapped up in the story and ends up trying to help capture the serial killer. It was a very fun read. I love the idea of the multiverse. That's something that always intrigues me, even though it's super overdone. Especially this seems like a cultural moment for like the multiverse of madness and that kind of stuff. But I love those kinds of stories. I love thinking about alternate realities where things are happening kind of in mirror image to what's happening here with slight differences. So I love the premise right away. And yeah, I thought it hit all the notes. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars and would happily recommend it. The very last book that I read in the month of September was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And this is the worst book I have read so far this year. I'm not going to try and like hedge on my feelings on that one. I gave it 2 stars. It's my only 2-star book so far this year. I just really, maybe mysteries aren't for me. I've heard this is one of Agatha Christie's best works, and I know she's a very famous, prolific author, but it just did not work for me. It was very short, which I was very happy about because I got through it really quickly. The premise of And Then There Were None is that there are 10 people who are invited to this island under false pretenses. They all think they're going there for a different reason, and then when they arrive, they find out that they're trapped and that someone is trying to murder them all. And they don't know if it's someone else that's on the island or if it's one of the 10 people who ended up here together. And so there's suspicion thrown around, they're all trying to figure out who done it as they're disappearing one by one. All the characters were just introduced kind of in a jumble out of the gate. I had a really hard time keeping them all straight in my head because, again, there were 10 characters all introduced right at the beginning. I couldn't keep them all straight until like already half of them had died and there were only 5 left. And then I was finally like, oh, okay, well, I've read enough now that I understand who these 5 remaining characters are. I didn't care about any of them because they weren't developed enough to really have very much of a personality on any of them really. And so the fact that they were in danger, I didn't really care about. I didn't feel scared for them. I don't know that I was supposed to. It's a cozy mystery, so it's not like a scary story or anything. But then at the end, the murderer has just like written a letter that gets found, and the letter explains everything about how they killed each person. And that's how you find out what happened. I don't know if that's normal for mysteries. Again, I have not read hardly any mysteries, maybe none, but I felt like that was weak sauce. Like, I just don't make, is that normal in mysteries? I don't know. Please tell me if it is, because if so, I will know not to read that. But it felt like a Deus Ex Machina type of moment of like, and this is how it is. And it felt like the curtain was just lifted and like someone was monologuing, like, here's how I did it all. And I was like, okay, were we supposed to be able to figure that out? And if so, like, were we supposed to care about figuring it out? I don't know. It did not vibe for me. The book was very short. It was like 265 pages. There are 10 characters, 10 people are murdered, and that's like one murder every 25 pages. So you would think this would be really interesting. And I'll be honest, like, when people were murdered, it was interesting. So the fact that I still didn't really enjoy this reading experience, I think says a lot. And maybe it just says a lot about my taste. I'm not saying this is a terrible book. I'm just saying this was definitely a book that I did not enjoy. And if you like And Then There Were None, please let me know in the comments below, because this has a really high rating on Goodreads. Yeah, this has a 4.28 average rating on Goodreads. So obviously I'm in the minority here. People really enjoy this story. So yeah, don't take my word for it. Definitely, if you like mysteries, don't let me steer you away. But on top of all the things that I didn't enjoy about the story, there was also just like misogyny and racism that was very uncomfortable. Specifically, some things about Jews. It didn't say anything bad about Jews, but it just said things like the little Jew boy and a couple of like off-color things that I was like, why did you need to say that? And then as far as misogyny, at one point in the story, one of the women on the island is very reasonably having a little bit of a breakdown. She's like crying and she's very upset, and she might be like laughing, crying, and like, going a little going a little, she's feeling it because she's trapped on an island where like there are only 10 people. 5 of them have already been murdered and they're dropping like flies. Like she's obviously very upset. And the male doctor in the story walks up and slaps her across the face to like break her out of her hysteria. And she literally thanks him for doing that. She thanks a person that she's only known for a few days for slapping her across the face because she was hysterical. And then the other men in the little social group thank the doctor for taking care of the hysterical woman that obviously needed to be brought under control. Like, it was just so cringy that I like almost put the book down at that point. I was just like, are you kidding me? Wasn't this written by a woman? What are you trying to say here? So that sucked. And then on top of that, after I rated it on Goodreads, I went and looked at my reading stats within the Goodreads website/app and checked out the publication year because this was published in 1939. So I knew it was one of the older books that I had read this year. And when I went on it, it showed the original publication title of And Then There Were None, which I will not repeat on this channel because it is extremely offensive. You can look that up on your own if you want, but suffice it to say, this book was originally published under a title that has the worst slur in our culture. And I was astounded and I messaged Goodreads, why is this book showing up on my publications of like books that I have read this year when I clearly marked that I had read And Then There Were None? And they were like, oh, that was the original publication title, which like, okay, thank you for explaining that. But like, I don't know. It was just really upsetting to me to learn that. And I understand the title of the book was actually based on the title of a poem within the book that Agatha Christie did not write. But that was still just, it was something. So yeah, I have very, very low opinion of this book. And I hope that if you read it, you really enjoy it. I'm not saying it's a bad book. It's just definitely not the book for me. Yeah, that was a lot. I'm sorry. Otherwise, September was so good. It was such a good reading month. I read 7 things, which is right up there with the top, number of things that I've read any month of this year. And so I was feeling really good about it. And obviously the Expanse, the Broken Earth trilogy, there were some just great things that I read this month. I regret none of it. So towards the end of September, I went to my very first ever book launch event at my local bookstore, Joseph Beth, here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I was super excited about it because it was for the launch of Lark Ascending by Silas House. If you've never heard of Silas House, he is a beloved Kentucky literary author, and he lives here in my city. I'm ashamed to say I had never read one of his books before. He normally writes stories with kind of an Appalachian setting or Appalachian perspective. But when I heard about this one, it said for fans of Station 11, which I read earlier this year, this is his first kind of dystopian novel, and it's supposed to follow kind of a near future story of a young man who is trying to escape America as a climate change and cultural refugee. So I was super intrigued by that. I actually pre-ordered it and I have already read it. Spoilers, I loved it, but I will talk about that next month when I do my next wrap up. So definitely check out Lark Ascending by Silas House. Because I was at the bookstore, I got my pre-order. I got to hear Silas House speak, which was super cool. And I knew I wanted to pick up a couple of other things. I was looking for Babel by R.F. Kuang because I thought that sounded like a great fall read. I loved her Poppy War trilogy earlier this year, and everyone has been raving about how good Babel is. It's a dark academia book. Unfortunately, it was not available at Joseph Beth or one of my other local bookstores that I have checked recently. So I'm still on the hunt for Babel. I haven't found it yet. But this was the first book that I picked up in my book haul. And then I was looking for a collection of poetry by Ada Limon, who's our new National Poet Laureate. And she also lives in my city, Lexington, Kentucky. So I was super excited. I've never read any of her poetry before. And then I had a different one of hers that was marked on my Goodreads. But The Hurting Kind, her newest collection, was the one that was available at Joseph Beth. So I picked this up and I'm super excited to start reading some of her poetry. Then I had plans. I wanted to pick up a copy of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It's October. I wanted something Halloween-y to read. I've heard great things about Frankenstein. I love the fact that Mary Shelley basically invented sci-fi as a genre when she published this in 1818. And I've heard that the book is kind of nothing like the Hollywood movies that we think of when we think of Frankenstein. And so I picked up this copy of Frankenstein, which I'm not going to lie, I picked up this specific version because I thought that this art on the cover was really, really cool. Let me hold it up here so you can see it. So it looks like kind of this zombie-ish monster, I guess, who's holding up Dr. Frankenstein in this really cool lab. And it also said that it had an introduction by Stephen King, which I thought sounded really cool. So I was excited about this, and I didn't even realize until I brought it home that the illustrator, Bernie Wrightston, has multiple really awesome illustrations throughout this copy. So I'm like really excited to read this now and find all of those because apparently he was famous for working on all kinds of comics and graphic novels, including like Swamp Thing and Batman and Spider-Man and like a lot of things that I love. So I'm really, really excited to read this, not only because of Frankenstein and Mary Shelley, but now also because of these amazing illustrations. So that's going to be awesome. I'm actually planning to do a Halloween-y themed reading vlog where I'm going to read this and the other Halloween-y book that I picked up during this book haul. So that would be The Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. It's set in 1893. I believe there's 3 sisters who are suffragists or maybe want to participate in the suffragist movement. They're trying to get the right to vote because women have no power in 1893. And I think along their journey, they harken back to the roots of when women did have power when they were witches. So that's really all I know, but I love learning about the history of the suffragist movement. And I also love witches and the whole like Salem witch trials era of history, which I know was like several hundred years earlier. But yeah, those are 2 things that I'm really intrigued by. And so this sounded like a really good read for the month of October. So planning to do a reading vlog involving both of these books, which I'm super excited about. I should have stopped there. I literally said in my mid-year book freakout that I'm trying not to buy books right now because my husband and I are moving into our van next summer. And so I've been literally downsizing like all of my book collection. And then I started a BookTube channel and now I'm obsessed. So this is not healthy. I should not have bought any of these, but it is what it is. And I don't regret it. So that's where we are. I bought 2 more books during this haul. The first one is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I've heard nothing but great things about this book. It is supposed to be about a house or like an orphanage maybe for like unwanted children, and they're either like mutants or they have some sort of magical abilities. Reading the synopsis on the back made me think of like Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, but I've heard just really great things about this from a lot of different booktubers. Side note, I hate this. They like shortened the cover so that they could say it was a New York Times bestseller on like a separate page. Why did you destroy my art like this? It's upsetting. It's upsetting when books do that. If I end up really enjoying this book, I might have to trade it in for a different copy at some point. But yeah, so I'm excited to read that. The very last thing that I bought was A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, which is by Marie Brennan. I love that Marie Brennan is so committed to the memoir that she doesn't even put her name on the front cover. But just look at how beautiful this is with this like anatomical drawing of a dragon. So from what I understand, Lady Trent is this obviously fictional woman who is a pioneer in the field of dragon zoology, because most people obviously are very afraid of dragons. And so she is like an adventurer scientist that's like really breaking open this field of science. I love pioneering women in science. Everything about this sounded like something that would appeal to me. Apparently, this is actually a series. And from what I understand, this is not like a trilogy, but like a significant series. So I'm a little intimidated to start this one just because I know I'll want to commit and read the whole thing. But I couldn't not buy this because it's so beautiful. And I really have a feeling that this book was written for me. So this is my book haul. I don't think I will read all of these in October, but I have already read Lark Ascending in the month of October, and I'm definitely going to be reading Frankenstein and the Once and Future Witches this month. So very excited for that. And I just shook the whole camera. That's my September reading wrap up and my September book haul. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you got some good book recommendations out of this. Please leave a comment below and let me know what your favorite book is that you read in September, maybe what your October reading plans are, and hit the subscribe button below for more bookish content to come.